Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to this talk. My colleague, Kate Brereton, couldn't make it today, so I'm presenting on behalf of both. The topic is going to be on cultivating well-being in English language teaching and how we can support English language teachers to flourish and thrive. Rupert has already mentioned that I lead the MA TESOL program at the University of Essex, and I work very closely with practicing teachers, pre-service teachers, most of whom have never taught before. So well-being and their psychologies, their identities in the classroom are very important, and it is something that we consciously attend to in our classes and in their practicum as well. I will start by trying to define well-being, and I say try to define well-being because it has not been defined in general, in psychology and in general education yet. So we can't say that we have a definition of well-being that is widely accepted in psychology and general education. I'll say a little bit more about that in a while. I will then talk about well-being among teachers with a special focus on language teachers, and then share with you some ideas that Kate and I have about strategies that we can use to support teachers in terms of their well-being, and also some examples of more practical activities that we have come up with. We thought that it would be interesting to share them with you. Let's see what well-being is and what challenges teachers, and in particular language teachers, face with relation to their own well-being and that of their colleagues and students. Right. As I said earlier, there is no precise definition of well-being. So, I mean, if we look it up in a dictionary, the word well-being, it refers actually to the state of feeling healthy and happy. But it's more than that. Well-being is not just the state of being happy, relaxed, positive, comfortable all the time. A kind of definition that Holmes has actually given in her books. She has got two really interesting books. The first one, 2005, is more theoretical than the second one. The one, 2019, is a very practical book on how we can support teachers with their well-being. So she suggests that well-being is that state in which we are feeling good and we are functioning well. It is associated with stress, but many people think it's the opposite of stress. Yeah, so we have a stress as a psychological, as a mental condition, and then well-being is the opposite of that. But it's not exactly that. Okay? It is true that when we are experiencing positive well-being, we are not stressed, or we are experiencing very low levels of stress. But we can't say that the two are opposite terms. And it does not simply refer to how individuals can be relaxed, comfortable, and happy all the time. It's more than that, and it is much more complex than that. There are four core aspects of well-being. You see four types of well-being: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. These four core aspects, in a way, create a well-being system if we want to adopt a more systemic approach to the concept of well-being. Now, physical well-being refers to the state of being physically healthy. And emotional well-being is when our mental health is in a good state. It is in a good state, and this enables us to manage our anxiety, our stress, and deal with all these stressful moments in life, professional life and personal life as well. Intellectual well-being is actually very interesting because it refers to our cognition, to the way we think, and to the fact that we use our brain, we keep thinking, and we are trying to keep our brain engaged, interested, and focused on things that are important for us or things that are of interest to us. Okay? And the last one, spiritual well-being, is very interesting as well because it actually refers to the process of being in a good mental state by being connected with ourselves, with other people, and also with a number of aspects that have got some power for us. And these are not always, they are material most of the times, like music, like nature, like literature, arts, and so on. Now, these four core aspects of well-being create the well-being system. So when they are not in place, even if one of them is not in place, the whole well-being system collapses somehow. So it is not in place as well. And all these four aspects are interrelated and they influence one another. Now, when it comes to teachers, you see language in brackets, and this is because I will talk about some research findings and some insights from general education, and then I will also talk about language teachers specifically. Now, the first point, I think, is something that we all know, that teachers lead busy lives. And Day and Gu have conducted a very interesting study in which they somehow followed a large number of teachers for a number of years. And they actually concluded that they lead very busy lives because they take on personal and professional commitments. At the same time, they are the central hub in the classroom. And by this, we do not mean that we do not refer to strict lockstep environments, to environments which are 100% teacher-led. So the fact that we say that teachers are the central hub in the classroom doesn't mean that we neglect our students and we don't care about our students. And also teachers influence students' learning and psychologies. And there is a term in educational psychology which is emotional contagion. And this actually suggests that emotions, feelings are contagious. I don't know if you've been to a context where you may not understand the language, you may not understand what other people are saying, but if you see them or hear them laughing, you are inclined to laugh as well. I was actually at a talk a couple of months ago, and the talk was in German, and I don't speak German. I couldn't understand the word. I could see some information on the slides. Some words were similar to English, so I could just gather some of that. But it turned out that the speaker had a very good sense of humor because the audience was laughing all the time. And I understood that she had a good sense of humor because I could see and hear other people laughing. And I was inclined to laugh as well without knowing why, actually. But it was because I could see other people laughing. So emotions are easily transferred among different people. And this is very common among teachers and students who spend a lot of time in the classroom together. Now, in the workplace, these are some challenges that all teachers face, not just language teachers. They have an excessive workload, demands. In many institutions, a workload model is introduced. Okay, I'll put it this way. So there is a workload model which is introduced, and it indicates how many hours should be devoted to each task. The fact that the workload model has been introduced in some institutions doesn't mean that it is followed 100%, yeah? So many teachers are overworked. They do a lot more than what is included in their workloads. Interpersonal relationships can be quite challenging sometimes. Interpersonal relationships with colleagues and with students as well. There is often lack of support, of autonomy and control in the classroom. There are contexts in which teachers have little autonomy in what they are going to teach and in how they are going to teach it. There are issues with their professional role, and you see some examples in brackets like responsibilities, adjustment to change, career prospects, personal fulfillment, like when teachers are trying to reflect either on their own or with their line managers, where exactly this is taking them. So how can they advance their career? And there might be some obstacles there. And since we are talking about engagement a lot in this conference, another challenge is disengaged students. So students that do not pay attention to what is happening in class. And for those students, teachers need to expend additional effort in order to keep them focused, to get their attention back to what is happening during the lesson. Now, who is affected by low levels of well-being? Everyone is likely to be affected. Yeah? Some people tend to think that newly qualified teachers are the ones that are affected by low levels of well-being the most. But research has actually shown that everyone is likely to be affected at some point during their careers. Some teachers are more immune to stress. And Hiver and Dornier, in 2015, they introduced the concept of language teacher immunity. And they have suggested that we are trying to avoid negative experiences, but in fact, negative experiences make us stronger. And for the teachers that they were talking about in their article, these negative experiences have made them more immune to stress, and they allowed them to have like a protective armor, in a sense, or coping strategies that they would activate when they wanted to battle stress or other anxiety-provoking aspects of their teaching and of their roles. So some are more immune to stressors, but some others are more vulnerable. And here you see a bit more, like more detailed information about who is affected. And I have divided the people that are likely to be affected into three groups. The first one is newly qualified teachers who face high levels of attrition. And research has actually shown that the majority of newly qualified teachers who might suffer from very high levels of stress are the ones who leave the profession within the first 5 years of teaching, of their careers. So newly qualified teachers are affected because of attrition. Mid-career teachers are also likely to be affected because here we are talking about a more chronic kind of stress which might lead to burnout. And when it comes to leaders, managers, directors, and so on, the challenge here is that they need to manage their own well-being, but they are also in charge of the people they work with. So it is not just their own well-being that they need to focus on, but they also need to look after others' well-being in their institutions. When it comes to language teachers in particular, Kate and I have tried to reflect on the difficulties or the challenges that they experience, and we have come up with some ideas. The first one being this debate that was very common back in the 80s and the 90s about the native, like English-speaking teachers and the non-native English-speaking teachers. Mainly the work by Peter Medguys, who actually wrote an influential article in 1997 in the English Language Teaching Journal, in which he actually discussed the, let's say, the advantages and disadvantages of being a native and a non-native speaker, English-speaking teacher. Some of the more specific challenges are accent. This is something that stresses out our students. One of the main causes of speaking anxiety among language learners is the fact that they have this native accent, yeah? So the traces of native accent that it's very difficult to get rid of, even for those, not just our learners, but even for those people that are much more experienced speakers and have been living into a certain country for a large number of years. So the foreign accent is something that remains for all of them, and this is one of the main causes of speaking anxiety among learners. But when it comes to teachers, and we are talking here about non-native English-speaking teachers, accent is one of the causes of language teacher anxiety as well. And not only does it lead to high levels of language teacher anxiety, but also to low levels of self-confidence and self-esteem when they deliver lessons in the classroom. The second point that is related to native versus non-native English-speaking teachers is learning versus acquisition. And by this, I mean that we all have acquired our native language naturally. We were listening to it by the people that were around us, and this is how we learned it. And then at school, we might have received some more specific instruction on aspects of the language, but in this case, in the case of our native languages, we are talking about acquisition. But in the case of foreign languages, or even second languages sometimes, learning, classroom teaching has actually taken place. And this is what we mean by learning in this particular case. And sometimes because I do research with language teachers, and when I interview language teachers, many of the native teachers actually tell me that it was very challenging at the start of their careers because they felt that they had to relearn their native language in order to be able to teach it. And another point that has been put forward with relation to this native, non-native speaker debate is empathy, the extent to which we can understand other people's difficulties and concerns, and how easy it is for us as teachers to put ourselves into our learners' shoes and understand what happens and what makes them nervous when they are learning a foreign language. I'm not saying that these arguments are all true, really, and I think that research has moved forward, and we are not talking anymore about native, non-native, who is better. Many people have introduced the term LX speaker, so X can be any number. Yeah, we can think of L2, L3, L4, and so on. But this is something that, at least for newly qualified teachers, can be an issue. It can be something that concerns them. The second set of, let's say, difficulties or challenges that language teachers experience is language teacher anxiety, which I have already mentioned, or other emotions. And in this case, we are mainly talking about negative emotions, primarily negative emotions, and the concern over professional identities, like who am I in the classroom in this particular context, who am I outside of class in the staff room, okay? There are lots of professional identity shifts that are happening throughout their careers, and the limiting self-beliefs that are caused by high levels of teacher anxiety. We actually mean low, as I mentioned earlier, low levels of self-esteem or low levels of self-confidence. The belief that they are not good enough in order to be able to teach that language, which impedes them from improving, from becoming better teachers. So the high levels of language teacher anxiety and the limiting self-beliefs have an impact on teaching selves, on teaching practice, their own feelings about their professional role, and the expectations of their roles as well. The other set of causes that might influence the levels of language teacher well-being are large classes, and they are in fact a problem in many parts of the world. So when someone, let's say, gives a lecture, which is like an academic lecture, it doesn't really matter how big the audience is, yeah? Because a lecture does not necessarily require participation and interaction. But when we are talking about language teaching, smaller groups are most of the times more manageable, and smaller groups help the teacher to better achieve the aims of the lesson. But the truth is that larger classes are very common in certain parts of the world, and they can be very challenging for teachers to manage. So in these large classes, communication is hindered because of the number of the students, and there are also implications for classroom management and teacher roles. We know, for example, that with the smaller and more manageable groups, the teacher can take on different roles. The teacher can be the feedback provider, teacher can be a participant. Okay? So the teacher can participate in what is going on in class or participate in what students are discussing in groups. But if we are talking about large classes, this is not always possible. So managing these classes can be quite demanding. Within language education well-being, the concept of well-being has only recently been discussed. There are some very new publications. One of them is not out yet, but is forthcoming. I was thinking about that within language education, lots of other related concepts have been discussed. We haven't used the term well-being as such in research, in language education research, but we indirectly touch upon well-being by researching the three constructs that you see on the screen, by researching emotions. So when we are researching emotions, language teacher emotions, and in particular language teacher anxiety, which is the most widely studied emotion, negative emotion in this case, we touch upon well-being. Okay, because anxiety is an important part of that, and so are other emotions. When we talk about emotional intelligence, again, we indirectly refer to well-being. We do not use the term well-being as such, but emotional intelligence entails well-being. So emotional intelligence, which refers to our own ability to understand the emotions that we experience, our ability to understand other people's emotions by empathizing with them or helping them to regulate their emotions, and our ability to form relationships like bonds with other people in different ways, different kinds of relationships. So all these abilities indicate higher levels of emotional intelligence. So when we talk about emotional intelligence in language education, or when we research emotional intelligence in language education, we touch upon well-being as well. And burnout is also another concept that includes well-being somehow, and it is a psychological construct that has been researched by some language education researchers. So it is not that it is such a new concept, it is just that we haven't touched upon it, we haven't discussed it by using this specific word. Another reason might also be that it is something that we cannot measure as such. It's difficult to include it in research designs, but we are getting there. So more and more people are interested in this topic, and more projects on well-being are taking place. When it comes to cultivating well-being, there are strategies that we can use, and we can also look at strategies that are used in psychology and in general education and see how we can possibly adapt those to the work that we do in language. But before I talk about the strategies and some possible activities, I just want to show you this. So what this actually shows is that within teacher education, the focus is mainly on technical skills and teaching methods. So you see it's balanced that way. So the focus is mainly on technical skills, on teaching methodologies. In teacher education programs, either pre-service or in-service, we talk a lot about what method is the best one to choose, how we can create materials, how we can adapt existing materials, how we can use existing materials as they are without making any changes, how we can give feedback to our students, how we can test our students. So these are very common topics that are part of language teacher education programs. These are very important topics, okay? So the fact that I'm saying that socio-emotional dimensions of teaching should be given more attention doesn't mean that we need to take out the technical skills and the teaching methods, okay? Technical skills and teaching methods are very important, but we might want to consider looking at the socio-emotional dimensions of teaching a lot more and find ways to include them, to incorporate them in teacher education programs at any level. It's funny actually because teacher well-being for some people might mean that we adopt a selfish or an egocentric approach to teaching, yeah, because we focus on our own well-being as teachers. And when I was working on, I was interviewing teachers, very experienced teachers, a couple of years ago, and the study was about the emotions that they experience and the strategies that they use to deal with those emotions in the classroom. And I interviewed a large number of teachers who teach English at universities in the UK. So one of them told me this. I apologize for the length of the quote, but I thought I should keep it as it is so that you read it. So for me, that was maybe the most interesting answer I received to all the interview questions I did for that project, because it enabled me to think and to think of what we mean by using terms such as teacher well-being, supporting teachers to flourish, to thrive, and so on and so forth. We are still talking about communicative language teaching, classrooms in which communication and interaction is enabled, and classrooms that are learner-centered. The fact that we focus on language teacher well-being in research or in teacher education or in discussions that we have does not mean that our classrooms are not learner-centered anymore. They are still learner-centered. But why do we need to attend to that? Okay? Because we need to look after ourselves because we are able to look after other people. An example that Kate and I were thinking about is the oxygen masks in the airplanes. So when the flight attendants are showing to passengers the safety instructions, yeah, they say that in the unlikely event of an emergency landing and so on, you need to apply your own oxygen mask, and if you are traveling with a child, you need to do your own first and then the child's, yeah? So it doesn't mean that you are not going to look after the child, yes? So you're going to put your own oxygen mask first and then you will help the child. But it probably indicates that you would need to be in a position to be in a position that enables you to help someone else, okay? So teachers often need oxygen masks, and I'm using it here metaphorically, okay, not literally. Teachers often need oxygen masks in their own teaching, in their own practice, and they need to put on their own oxygen masks first. Yeah? So they need to be emotionally safe or healthy in the classroom in order to help their students then. Right, so the strategies are divided into three main sets. So this is number one. And what I have done here is the first slide includes strategies that we have thought about. The second slide includes a possible activity. Then we move on to strategies number two, second set of strategies, and a possible activity as well. Now, the first set of strategies is what we have called the self-critic. increasing teacher self-awareness. This is something that is done in the majority of teacher education programs, and this is also something that reflection is also something that teachers very often do, and most of the times it is done unconsciously. When they go back home after class, they might be thinking about the lesson. So this is a form of reflection, but it is not done in the official way that it is done in a CELTA course, for example, or on an MA course. But reflection is happening all the time. Teachers are reflective, but the strategy that could be useful in that case is to increase this amount of reflection and to increase teacher self-awareness. Because this will enable teachers to be personally and professionally effective and efficient. Just one example is time management skills, which can be an issue for a large number of teachers. And this can also be done through journaling, like producing a journal entry or a diary entry, being involved in action research projects. And these do not have to be like longitudinal projects that last for a longer period of time, but action research suggests that teachers pick up a problem that they face in their own teaching, or something that challenges them in the classroom, something that they do not feel comfortable, they are not sure about how to deal with it, and research it by trying different methods, by discussing it with other people, experimenting a little bit, if you like, in order to see how they can improve their practice, because this process or this suggestion will make teachers more confident about what they will do. Now, a possible exercise in the next staff training day, ask teachers to think of a time when they felt capable of and in control of their stress at work or in their life overall. So what is different now? Trying to think, like to look back and choose a moment when they were in control of their emotional conditions, let's say. So what is different now? And ask them to draft a plan outlining what they would like to improve. So for each area of improvement, they should describe both the current state and what they are aiming at. Okay, so they should describe their current state, their target, and some practical steps that can help them to reach this target. You see that this possible exercise requires a reflection, and it focuses actually on what reflection is all about. Reflection includes, it's like the Roman god Janus, yeah, who is looking on both directions, yeah. So reflection, in a way, enables us to look at what has already happened and what is going to happen, like looking backwards and forwards as well. Something that I actually come across in Ayer's book, it's called The Elephant in the Staff Room. I don't know if you have come across this book before. It's called The Elephant in the Staff Room, How to Reduce Stress and Support Teacher Wellbeing, something like that. So he actually suggests that low levels of well-being and emotional challenges are always there, but we do not see them, we neglect them. This is why he used this metaphor, the elephant in the staff room. It's always there, it's something big, it's something important, but we don't want to see it. So in his book, he actually uses these four, let's say, visual diagrams. All four represent work-life balance. So you see in A, work and life are two separate things. They are independent, so the two circles do not touch each other. In B, work and life are sort of closer to each other, but the work circle is much bigger, yeah? Which probably means that we attach more importance to work rather than life. Now, C is just one circle that includes work and life together. We don't know how much is devoted to each aspect, but they are together. And in D, we see again one big circle, which is life, and part of that is work. So work is a much smaller circle within the bigger circle that is called life. And it is interesting to use these graphs that Ayer has included in his book and give them to teachers and ask them to choose the one that applies for them. And ask them to also comment on which of these is the ideal one, yeah? Or maybe which one they would like to reach. Again, thinking ahead. Now, the second set of strategies is to encourage teachers to ask for help. Okay. This is something that we as teachers encourage our students to do. We always invite them to ask questions. We ask them to come and see us during our office hours. We might arrange one-to-one meetings with our students. But it is important to encourage teachers to ask for help from other teachers. Peer dialogue is encouraged in this way, encouraging caring and healthy relationships with colleagues through co-teaching, through peer reviews of teaching, and sharing of good practice. Co-teaching is something that is happening in many institutions. I'm sure peer reviews of teaching are also happening in many institutions, but it is useful to reflect on how these are happening, these are taking place, how they are done, and who could be paired with whom. Yeah, in order to increase the learning potential for the teachers and in order to increase their willingness to learn from others and to share with others. And an exercise that I have included here is, again, it's about the staff training day. So in the next staff training day, ask teachers to make a list of the people that they would turn to for help if needed. Ask them to also reflect specifically on how each person on the list could help them. And there is an interesting term in psychology, that of significant others. So significant others are those people that matter to us. And they can come from any aspect of our lives. Okay? So significant others for each one of us might be some of our colleagues, might be some family members, a very good friend. It is useful to find a way to use this concept, this idea of significant others, and see how teachers could benefit from them. So making this list of people that they could come from any aspect of their life, not just from work, and reflect on how each person could possibly help them, and encourage them to seek for help from these specific people that they have identified as people they could turn to for help. And now the third set of strategies is relationships. And yesterday I attended Sarah Mercer's talk, and it was on learner engagement, but she highlighted the role, the importance of rapport, of teacher-student rapport, and the quality of relationships, interpersonal relationships in the classroom. So this set of strategies focuses on building and maintaining a strong and supportive relationship with students, because this is something that will make classroom management easier, but it also encourages, it is also important to encourage teachers to become effective communicators. And by this, by communication, we do not just refer to verbal communication, what we say and how we say it, but we also refer to non-verbal communication. And by this, we refer to so many different aspects of classroom management that teachers are trained to attend to. So when classroom management as a topic is discussed in teacher education programs, we tend to focus on things like eye contact, maintaining eye contact with your students or with your audience, using gestures, facial expressions. Actually, gestures are being used in classroom teaching in a very nice way. And after they are used for a certain period of time, they create like a unique code of communication among the teacher and the students. I have observed the teachers who use gestures and students immediately understand what the teacher means. And this is because the teachers have been using the specific gestures for a longer period of time, and after a certain time they don't need to say anything, just use the gesture and students get it and they know what they are expected to do. So we are talking here about verbal communication, what we say, and also the use of humor. Many teachers like using self-deprecating humor as well. And so not just jokes, but using self-deprecating humor through anecdotes, and also non-verbal communication through gestures, eye contact, facial expressions, etc. So the possible exercise in this particular case, in the next staff training day, give teachers a list of techniques that are used in class to help them relate with their students, communicate effectively with them, etc. And ask them to tick off from that list which of these techniques they use and which ones they don't use. Because there might be some techniques that they do not use at all or they do not often use. And again, ask them to reflect on why this is so and how or when they could use them in class. It would be useful to maybe expand this to include like observations, things that they have observed during the peer reviews of teaching, that they are useful techniques for effective communication and for effective classroom management that they would like to steal, in inverted commas, from other colleagues. To conclude, Teacher well-being should be seen as a key priority in contemporary classrooms. As we said earlier, it's not selfish, and it doesn't mean that the classrooms, our teaching, our lessons are not learner-centered anymore. They are in fact learner-centered, but we attend to that as well. It is difficult to maintain for all teachers, but there is some hope. Okay, students matter, but teachers matter too. And thinking of emotional contagion, of this theory that I mentioned earlier, and thinking of the relationships between learners and teachers, student well-being might also, we can say that it also begins with teacher well-being. So on the next slides are my references.
Well, yeah,
good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.